They say the universe has a twisted sense of humor, and I guess I was the punchline. When I first met Hannah Carter, I honestly thought I'd won the cosmic lottery. She breezed into my life wearing a red coat and that crooked grin like she'd stepped off the set of a Hallmark movie. I was 23, optimistic to a fault, and stupid in all the ways that make for great cautionary tales. I was never the guy people noticed. Average height, average face, average everything. So average my own reflection sometimes yawned back at me. Even my name, Daniel Brooks, sounded like a man born to file insurance claims. But Hannah noticed me, or at least she pretended to, which was enough back then. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue in Cincinnati. Nothing fancy, just plastic chairs, too much cheap beer, and a soundtrack of half-drunk nostalgia. She sat across from me eating potato salad straight out of the bowl with a plastic spoon. And I remember thinking, this woman doesn't care what anyone thinks. I should have realized that wasn't always a good thing. It took her exactly 2 weeks to slide her number across the table at a diner. 4 months later, we were living together in a rental duplex with walls so thin you could hear our neighbors argue about coupons. A year after that, we were married in a courthouse ceremony, so plain the clerk forgot to stamp our license, and I had to go back the next morning to get it fixed. Looking back, maybe that was the universe trying to give me an exit, but I was too busy convincing myself we were building something real. When Hannah got pregnant with Mason, our son, she glowed. Literally. It was the one time in our marriage she seemed happy without needing to prove it to anyone. A year later, our daughter Lily came along, and I felt like maybe I'd finally figured out how to be someone's family. I was working in software development, coding late into the night, earning just enough to pay the mortgage on our first real house in Dayton, a beige ranch with a sagging porch swing and a backyard the kids called the jungle. Every morning, I'd pack Mason's lunch, kiss Hannah on the cheek, and pretend we were just another normal family. But normal has a way of unraveling when you're not looking. It started with little things. Hannah's phone lighting up after midnight. The sudden interest in yoga classes she never seemed to actually attend. The way she'd sigh when I talked about work, as if my boring stories were a personal offense to her glamorous daydreams. I used to tell myself I was imagining it, that every marriage went through rough patches, that if I just worked harder, earned more, planned better vacations, learned how to make fancy risottos, it would fix itself. Spoiler, it didn't. On the night of our 15th anniversary, while I stood in the kitchen reheating leftover lasagna, Hannah strolled in wearing jeans and an expression like she was about to tell me the dog died. She didn't even bother to sit down. "I want a divorce," she said, in the same tone she'd used to announce she'd bought new throw pillows. I didn't say anything. Honestly, part of me was relieved. Another part wanted to applaud her for the timing. It takes real dedication to ruin a milestone so thoroughly. I stared at her, this woman who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during old movies, and I felt nothing. Not the heartbreak I expected, not even anger, just the hollow resignation of someone who finally understood he'd been living in a cardboard cutout of a marriage. "Fine," I said, 2 syllables that tasted like old pennies in my mouth. She blinked, probably expecting me to beg or rage, or have a meltdown worthy of reality TV. When I didn't, she folded her arms and looked at the floor. And that was it. 17 years reduced to a single word and the quiet sound of the microwave beeping behind us. If I'd been a more dramatic man, maybe I'd have smashed a plate or wept into my cold lasagna. Instead, I just thought about the stack of bills on my desk and wondered how fast she'd drain what was left of our joint savings. Turns out, I wouldn't have to wait long to find out. A week after Hannah's declaration, I discovered just how far she'd already moved on. It was a Thursday night, one of those evenings where the world feels dim and muffled, like you're watching your own life through a dirty window. I was folding Mason's t-shirts when I heard Hannah's laughter drifting up from the driveway. I peeked through the blinds just in time to see her climb out of a silver Audi that definitely didn't belong to any of her girlfriends. The guy behind the wheel was a cliché come to life. Square jaw, too much cologne, and hair so perfect it probably had its own Instagram account. He didn't look at me, but I swear he knew I was watching. He gave Hannah a little wave, like he was sending me a personal middle finger, and pulled away. I stood there, clutching a crumpled Minecraft shirt, and thought, so this is how it starts. She came inside humming, her face pink from the cold and probably from the thrill of pretending her double life was still a secret. When she noticed me, she did that thing where she pretended to be surprised I existed. "Oh, hey, Dan," You're home early. I looked at the clock. It was almost 9. Yeah, real early, I deadpanned. She didn't even flinch. Just walked past me to the kitchen, where she poured herself a glass of Chardonnay. Like nothing about this was strange. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her in that stupid Audi, laughing at something Perfect Hair said. So instead of lying in bed stewing, I got up and did the most cliché thing imaginable. I snooped. I wasn't proud of it, but when your life's already circling the drain, a little more indignity doesn't seem like such a big deal. I waited until she was in the shower the next morning singing off-key to some pop song about empowerment, and I checked her phone. The first text I saw was from a contact labeled, Work. Work. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. Same time Friday? My stomach did this little twist, like it was trying to crawl out of my body and find a happier host. I should have felt angry, betrayed, but mostly, I felt ridiculous. Here I was, a grown man with a mortgage, a receding hairline, and 2 kids, reading messages that sounded like excerpts from a bargain bin romance novel. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, then went into the bathroom. Hannah was rinsing conditioner out of her hair, her eyes closed, humming. For a moment, I wondered if she'd ever looked at me the way she probably looked at Perfect Hair. I closed the door quietly, so she wouldn't see me standing there, pathetic and small. A few days later, she left me a birthday gift on the dining table. A small box wrapped in bright red paper with a gold ribbon. The kind of packaging that screamed expensive jewelry but felt more like a booby trap. It sat there for hours while I debated whether to open it. When I finally did, I almost laughed. Inside was a cheap digital watch, like something you'd buy at a gas station when you forgot your anniversary. Taped to it was a note. Sorry, I couldn't get you something nicer. Things have been tight lately. Love, Hannah. It was so tone-deaf, so absurd, that for a second, I wondered if she was messing with me. Was this her way of telling me she knew I knew? Or was she really that oblivious? I set the watch on the counter and went to bed, leaving it ticking in the dark like a tiny, smug time bomb. 2 days later, she announced she was going on a work trip for the weekend. It's a team-building retreat, she explained, as if I were too dense to question it. Sure, I said. Try not to catch anything you can't cure with penicillin. She blinked, stunned. It was the first time I'd said anything that hinted I wasn't blind. Excuse me, she snapped. I shrugged. Nothing. Have fun. That night, after she left, I drank whiskey straight from the bottle and watched a documentary about volcanoes erupting. It felt oddly appropriate. As lava poured over villages, the narrator solemnly explained that sometimes destruction was necessary for new life to begin. It sounded poetic at the time. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and the certainty that this was all about to get uglier. I was right. Hannah's work trip was the final nudge I needed to stop pretending. She came home Sunday night wearing a hotel logo hoodie and carrying a branded water bottle like a cheap souvenir. I didn't bother asking how the team building went. She didn't bother offering details. We were beyond that little charade. The kids were in the living room watching cartoons. Mason shot me a look that said, "Are you going to pretend everything is fine again, Dad?" I didn't have the guts to meet his eyes for long. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Hannah slept next to me like nothing was wrong. Her breathing was steady, almost peaceful. Mine sounded like I'd run a marathon through a field of nails. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made to keep our lives afloat, the nights coding until my vision blurred, the holidays spent explaining to the kids why Mommy was working late, the quiet meals where I pretended we were still a family. It was pathetic, and I was the biggest fool in the whole sorry story. Monday morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Marissa Doyle, and she had the polite voice of someone who'd heard every flavor of marital train wreck. When I explained the situation, she didn't gasp or sigh. She just asked, "Do you have evidence of her infidelity?" "Just a feeling," I admitted. She paused, probably trying not to groan. "Daniel, feelings don't win cases. Pictures, messages, financial records, those do." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the car outside her office wondering what the hell I was doing. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted the last 15 years of my life back. But since time travel wasn't on the table, I settled for the next best thing, information. So I hired a private investigator. His name was Leo Barron, and he looked exactly like someone who spent his life following cheating spouses, wrinkled khakis, an old Nikon camera, and an attitude that said he'd seen it all. "Trust me," he said, sliding me a contract across a diner table. "By the time I'm done, you'll know everything you never wanted to." He wasn't kidding. 3 days later, he handed me a manila envelope so thick it could have doubled as a doorstop. Inside were photos, lots of photos. Hannah kissing perfect hair in a restaurant. Hannah holding his hand in a parking garage. Hannah checking into a hotel with a smile so bright it made me want to vomit. I flipped through them like I was reading some twisted comic book. Page after page of proof that my life was a joke. Got more if you want, Leo said, sipping his coffee like he was offering me a refill. That's enough, I muttered. Plenty. He nodded. You want video too? God, no. It was bad enough to see the still images. I didn't need to watch the director's cut. When I got home, Hannah was in the kitchen cooking pasta like she hadn't just spent the weekend wrecking our marriage for the 100th time. I set the envelope on the counter without saying a word. She glanced at it, then back at me. What's this? I didn't answer. I just walked past her to the living room, sat down on the couch, and turned on the news. I could hear her opening the envelope, the rustle of paper, the sudden sharp intake of breath when she realized exactly what she was holding. For a moment, the house was dead silent. Then she came to stand in the doorway, her face pale. Daniel, this isn't. I turned up the volume on the TV. Some anchor was droning about interest rates. Anything was better than listening to her try to gaslight me. When she realized I wasn't going to play along, she disappeared upstairs. I didn't follow. That night, she didn't come to bed. I didn't care. For the first time in months, I actually slept. The next morning, she tried to corner me in the kitchen. Can we talk? She whispered, like Mason and Lily were deaf. Talk about what? I asked flatly. About us. I leaned against the counter and looked her up and down. There is no us. There's you, and there's me, and there's the divorce papers I'll be filing next week. Her lip trembled. I thought she might start crying. Part of me almost wanted her to. At least it would have been honest. But instead, she did what she always did. She composed herself, flipped her hair over her shoulder, and walked away. I watched her go, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Filing for divorce wasn't as cathartic as I'd imagined. I'd fantasized about the moment, striding into the lawyer's office, dropping a folder of evidence like some avenging angel, feeling a surge of righteous satisfaction. Instead, I felt like a janitor cleaning up a mess I didn't make. Marissa, my lawyer, flipped through the photos and financial records with all the emotion of someone reviewing an insurance claim. You understand you're still going to lose half your assets, she said, glancing up. Even though she cheated? Ohio's a no-fault state, she explained, her tone apologetic but firm. The affair doesn't affect property division. Unless you can prove she spent marital funds on her lover. Oh, she had. Thanks to Leo's report, I knew she'd bought that clown expensive watches, weekend trips, and more steak dinners than we'd had in 15 years. I'd even found a receipt for a $400 spa experience she charged to our joint credit card. Yeah, I sighed, sliding over the folder. I can prove it. Marissa nodded, making a note. Then we'll file for reimbursement of those expenses. It wasn't much consolation, but at least it was something. I signed what felt like 1,000 forms and left her office with a headache the size of the Midwest. That night, Hannah tried again. She came into the living room while I was watching a rerun of Pawn Stars, her face washed out and tired. For once, she didn't have her hair curled or her makeup done. She looked like the person I'd married, before she decided she was too good for an average life with an average man. Daniel, can we please talk? I muted the TV, but didn't look at her. I know I've hurt you, she began. But we have a family. Can't we just? Stop, I said quietly. You don't get to play the family card now. Her mouth worked silently, like she was trying to decide which script to read from. Sympathy? Guilt? Indignation? In the end, she picked the one she thought would work best. She started crying. Big, wet tears slid down her face, and her shoulders shook. A few years ago, it would have gutted me to see her cry. But sitting there, watching her dab at her cheeks with trembling fingers, I felt nothing but a dull ache of wasted years. You're not sorry, I told her, my voice calm. You're sorry you got caught. She flinched, but didn't deny it. When she realized I wasn't going to comfort her, she wiped her eyes, took a breath, and shifted tactics. If you're determined to leave, can we at least keep this civil? For the kids. I finally looked at her, really looked at her. Civil? You mean like how you were civil when you lied to me for 2 years? Silence. I picked up the remote, unmuted the TV, and leaned back. Close the door on your way out. She left, shutting the door with a soft click that sounded exactly like defeat. After that, things moved fast. Our joint accounts drained quicker than I expected. Hannah withdrew thousands within days, probably assuming I'd be too passive to notice. Joke's on her. I was many things, but I wasn't stupid. I called the bank, froze what was left, and opened an account in my name only. The banker, a soft-spoken woman named Cheryl, gave me a sympathetic look as she clicked through the screens. "Rough time?" she asked gently. "You could say that," I muttered. She offered me a tissue. "You're not the first man to sit here and do this." Somehow, that made me feel a little less pathetic. I walked out of the bank feeling like I'd severed the last tie tethering me to her. For the next few weeks, we barely spoke. We communicated through Marissa, who seemed almost amused by how quickly Hannah's amicable separation turned into a legal slugfest. I focused on Mason and Lily. If I couldn't save my marriage, I could at least make sure they didn't drown in the wreckage. I started picking them up from school every day, cooking dinner, helping with homework. They never asked why Mom was working late so often. I think they already knew. One evening, Mason looked up from his math worksheet. "Are you and Mom gonna get divorced?" I took a slow breath, my throat tight. "Yeah, buddy. We are." "Okay," he said simply, and went back to his homework. I went to the kitchen and cried into a dish towel, trying not to make a sound. The day the final papers came through felt anticlimactic. Hannah was supposed to come by the house to pick up the last of her things, some clothes, a box of old photos, a tacky lamp she insisted was an heirloom. I almost threw it in the trash on principle. I spent the morning pacing the living room like a caged animal. Every time I passed the fireplace, I caught sight of our wedding photo, her in that simple white dress, me in a suit 2 sizes too big because I couldn't afford a tailor. For a moment, I wondered if it would hurt less to smash the frame or leave it as a reminder. I settled for turning it face down on the mantel. When she finally showed up, she knocked instead of using her key. A small detail, but it made me realize she already saw herself as a stranger in this house. I opened the door without a word. She looked tired, her eyes hollow. She tried to smile, but it was more like a grimace. "I'll be quick," she said softly. "Good." She moved around the living room like a ghost, collecting the debris of our life together. A sweater here, a half-finished novel there. When she picked up the lamp, she paused, tracing her finger along the dusty shade. "You always hated this thing," she murmured. "Still do." Her lips twitched. "At least you're consistent." That was the closest we came to a civil conversation. She carried her boxes to the car without asking for help. I watched from the doorway, feeling like I was witnessing the last scene of a very long, very bad play. When she came back for the final time, she stood in the entryway, clutching her purse like a shield. "I hope someday you can forgive me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I already have," I lied. It was easier than telling her the truth, that forgiveness wasn't even on the table. She nodded, her eyes shining with tears she refused to shed in front of me. Then she turned and walked out of my life for good. I shut the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. And that was it. No apology would bring back the man I used to be. No closure would fix the hollow place in my chest. Over the next few weeks, I started the process of reclaiming my life, one small step at a time. I canceled the joint credit cards. I changed the locks. I updated the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. I even donated the throw pillow she'd picked out, just to erase one more trace of her from my house. It felt good, in a small, sad way. One morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying the fine lines around my eyes, the silver creeping into my hair. I barely recognized the man staring back at me, but I also realized I didn't have to. I didn't have to be the husband anymore, or the fool, or the doormat. I could be something else. A father, a survivor, maybe even a man who could laugh about all this one day. Later that night, I took Mason and Lily out for ice cream. Just us. No explanations, no awkward conversations. While they argued over toppings, I sat back in the booth, listening to their laughter. It was the first time in a long time I'd felt something close to peace. I knew the road ahead would be messy. Custody schedules, co-parenting with someone I didn't trust, endless paperwork. But for the first time, I felt ready. Ready to stop surviving and start living again. The first few months after Hannah left felt like detox. Every morning, I woke up expecting to hear her voice, to see her hairdryer abandoned on the bathroom counter, to smell that floral perfume she wore even when she was just going to Target. Instead, the house was quiet. The kids adjusted faster than I did. Mason filled the silence with video games and endless questions about dinosaurs. Lily curled up with her sketchbook for hours, lost in worlds of her own design. Me? I just kept moving, afraid that if I stopped, I'd drown in the emptiness. My lawyer called one afternoon to confirm the last of the settlements had been finalized. Hannah would get her share of the house proceeds. I'd get full custody of Mason and Lily. The split was official, and there was no going back. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, it was just done. I took the paperwork and filed it in a cabinet behind the bills and old tax returns. Then I went outside, sat on the porch, and tried to remember the last time I'd been happy. Maybe it was when Mason was born, and I held him in that sterile hospital room, terrified I'd drop him. Or when Lily took her first steps in the backyard, arms outstretched like she was learning to fly. It definitely wasn't anything to do with Hannah. A week later, I ran into her by accident. I was picking up groceries, just the essentials, milk, bread, a sad frozen pizza. She was in the next checkout lane, wearing dark sunglasses indoors like some faded celebrity. We locked eyes. For a split second, I saw the woman I'd married, the one who used to kiss me goodnight and whisper that everything would be okay. Then she looked away, fumbling with her debit card. I paid for my things and left without saying a word. Later that night, Mason asked, "Dad, are you ever going to have a girlfriend?" I almost choked on my coffee. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "Just wondering. Mrs. Peters said you're still young enough." I snorted. Well, remind Mrs. Peters to mind her own business. But the question stuck with me. Was I ever going to date again? Trust anyone again? Or was this it? A life of solo frozen pizzas and reruns of Pawn Stars? I didn't know. Maybe I didn't want to know yet. For now, I focused on what I could control. I threw myself back into work, took extra freelance projects, finally learned to cook something besides boxed macaroni. On weekends, I took the kids to the zoo or the lake, anything to keep us moving forward. One Sunday, Lily tugged my sleeve while we were walking by the water. "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart. I like it better when it's just us." I swallowed hard and managed a smile. "Me too." That night, after they went to bed, I sat alone on the porch again, listening to the cicadas. The air smelled like grass and new beginnings. It was strange how grief and relief could coexist so perfectly. I still thought about Hannah sometimes, where she was, who she was with. But it was like remembering a character from a story I'd stopped caring about. I wasn't naive enough to believe I was healed. I had a long way to go, but at least I'd stopped bleeding. The next morning, I woke up early and made pancakes, bad ones, burned around the edges. The kids still ate them with big smiles. "Best pancakes ever," Mason declared. Lily nodded, her mouth full. In that moment, I realized I'd survived. Not with dignity, not with grace, but with enough left to build something better.